Chapter 1. Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was very tired of sitting by the river with her sister. She looked at the book her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations. Alice thought, what is the use of a book without pictures or conversations? She thought about making a daisy chain, but that meant getting up and picking flowers. Suddenly, a white rabbit with pink eyes ran by her. At first, it was not strange to see the rabbit. But then Alice heard the rabbit say, "Oh dear, I will be late." Later, she thought she should have been surprised, but it felt normal. Then the rabbit took a watch out of its pocket, and Alice was curious. She had never seen a rabbit with a pocket or a watch. So, she ran after it and saw it jump down a big rabbit hole. Alice jumped in after it without thinking about how she would get out. The rabbit hole was like a tunnel. She fell down quickly into what seemed like a deep well. The well was either very deep, or Alice was falling slowly. She had time to look around and wonder what would happen next. She tried to see below, but it was dark. She looked at the walls of the well and saw cupboards and bookshelves. There were also maps and pictures hanging up. As she fell, she took a jar from one shelf. It said orange marmalade, but it was empty. She didn't want to drop the jar, so she put it in a cupboard as she fell. Well, thought Alice, after such a fall, I won't even care about falling downstairs. My family will think I'm brave. I wouldn't even tell them if I fell off the top of a house. Down, down, down. Would the fall ever stop? I wonder how many miles I've fallen, she said out loud. I must be near the center of the earth. That would be 4,000 miles down. I think Alice had learned some things in school, and she thought it was good to say it. Yes, that's a good distance, but I wonder about latitude or longitude. Alice didn't know what these words meant, but she liked saying them. Then she thought, I wonder if I will fall through the earth. It would be funny to meet people who walk upside down. The antipathies, I think. She was happy that no one was listening when she made a mistake. But I will have to ask them what their country is called. Please, is this New Zealand or Australia? She even tried to curtsy while falling. What a silly girl I would seem. No, I should not ask. Maybe I will see the name somewhere. Down, down, down. Alice kept talking to herself. Dinah will miss me tonight. Dinah was her cat. I hope someone remembers her milk at dinner. Oh, Dinah, I wish you were here. There are no mice in the air, but you might catch a bat. That's just like a mouse, right? But do cats eat bats? Alice felt sleepy now, repeating, do cats eat bats? Do bats eat cats? Since she couldn't answer either question, it didn't matter how she said it. She felt drowsy and started to dream about walking with Dinah and asking her, did you ever eat a bat? When suddenly, thump. Thump. She landed on some sticks and dry leaves. The fall was over. Alice was not hurt at all. She jumped to her feet and looked up, but it was dark. In front of her was another long passage, and she could still see the white rabbit running away. Without wasting time, Alice ran after it. She heard the rabbit say, "Oh my ears and whiskers, how late it is." She was right behind it when it turned a corner, but it was gone. She found herself in a long, low hall lit by lamps hanging from the ceiling. There were doors all around, but they were locked. Alice tried every door, feeling sad, wondering how she would ever get out. Then she saw a little table made of glass. On it was a tiny golden key. Alice thought this key might open one of the doors, but it was either too small or didn't fit. On her second look around, she saw a low curtain she hadn't noticed before. Behind it was a little door about 15 inches tall. Alice tried the golden key, and to her great surprise, it fit. Alice opened the door and saw a small path that led to the most beautiful garden. She wanted to go outside to see the bright flowers and fountains, but she couldn't even fit her head through the doorway. Even if my head could go through, thought Alice, it wouldn't help unless my shoulders fit. Oh, how I wish I could fold up like a telescope. I could, if I only knew how. Many unusual things had happened lately, and Alice began to think that not much really was impossible. Waiting by the door seemed useless, so she went back to the table, hoping to find another key, or a book on how to fold like a telescope. This time, she found a little bottle that wasn't there before. It had a label saying, "Drink me" in big letters. It was fun to say, "Drink me," but wise Alice didn't want to do that right away. "No, I'll look first," she said, "to see if it says poison." She had read tales about children who got hurt because they didn't follow simple advice. She remembered that drinking from a bottle labeled poison usually ended badly. But this bottle did not say poison, so Alice took a sip. It was very tasty. It tasted like cherry, custard, pineapple, turkey, coffee, and buttery toast. So, she drank it all. "What a strange feeling," said Alice. "I must be shrinking like a telescope." And she was. Now Alice was 10 inches tall. She was excited because this was the right size to go through the little door to the lovely garden. She waited to see if she would get smaller. "What if I disappear, like a candle?" thought Alice. "What would I be like?" She wanted to picture the flame of a candle after it was blown out, but couldn't remember seeing it before. After a while, nothing happened, so she tried to go into the garden. But when she got to the door, she realized she forgot the golden key. When she went back to the table, she couldn't reach it. She could see it clearly, but climbing the slippery table was hard. After trying and getting tired, Alice sat down and cried. "Come on. There's no use in crying," she said to herself. "You should stop." She often gave herself good advice, though she rarely followed it, and sometimes scolded herself until she cried. Once, she remembered trying to box her own ears because she cheated in a croquet game she played against herself. She liked to pretend she was two people. But pretending to be two people is pointless. I'm hardly enough to make one person. Soon, Alice saw a little glass box under the table. She opened it and found a small cake that said "Eat me" in currants. "I'll eat it," said Alice. "If it makes me larger, I can reach the key. If it makes me smaller, I can go under the door. Either way, I will get into the garden." She took a small bite and asked herself, which way? Which way? She put her hand on her head to feel if she was growing. To her surprise, she stayed the same size. Normally, this is what happens when eating cake, but Alice was used to strange things happening, so she stopped expecting anything different. Determined, she finished off the cake. Chapter 2. Pool of Tears. Alice was very surprised. "Curiosa and curiosa," she cried. "Now I'm getting bigger like a big telescope. Goodbye, feet." When she looked down, her feet seemed very far away. "Oh, my poor little feet. Who will put on your shoes and stockings now? I can't do it. I will be too far away to help." "You must manage on your own," thought Alice. "But I should be kind to them, or maybe they won't walk where I want to go. I will give them new boots every Christmas." Alice thought about this while they walked. They should go by a carrier. It will be funny to send presents to my own feet. And the address will look odd. Alice's right foot, Esquire. Hearthrug. Near the fender. With Alice's love. Oh dear, what nonsense I am saying. Just then, her head hit the roof of the hall. In fact, she was now more than 9 feet tall. She quickly took the little golden key and hurried to the garden door. Poor Alice! It was hard for her to look into the garden with one eye while lying down. But to get through the door was impossible. She sat down and began to cry. "You should be ashamed of yourself," said Alice. "A big girl like you should not cry like this. Stop it now." But she kept crying and crying until there was a large pool of tears around her, about 4 inches deep and half down the hall. After a while, she heard little feet pattering in the distance. She quickly dried her eyes to see what was coming. It was the White Rabbit, nicely dressed, with a pair of white gloves in one hand and a big fan in the other. He was in a hurry, moving fast, and mumbling, "Oh. The Duchess? Oh. She will be angry if I made her wait." Alice felt so desperate that she was ready to ask for help. So when the rabbit got close, she began quietly, "If you please, sir." The rabbit jumped in surprise, dropped the gloves and fan, and quickly ran away into the dark. Alice picked up the fan and gloves. Since it was very hot in the hall, she kept fanning herself while talking. "Oh dear. How strange everything is today. Yesterday was just normal. I wonder if I have changed during the night. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I almost feel a little different. But if I am not the same, who am I? That's a big puzzle." She thought about all the children she knew who were her age to see if she had changed into one of them. "I'm sure I'm not Ada," she said. "Her hair is in long curls, but mine is not. I can't be Mabel, because I know many things, and she knows so little. Besides, she's she, and I'm I, and oh dear, how puzzling it all is. I will try to remember the things I used to know. Let me see. 4 times 5 is 12, and 4 times 6 is 13, and 4 times 7 is, oh dear. I will never get to 20. But the multiplication table doesn't matter. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. No, that's all wrong." Alice thought she must have changed into Mabel. She tried to say, "How doth the little," and she folded her hands as if she were in school. She started to repeat it, but her voice sounded strange, and the words did not come out right. "How doth the little crocodile improve his shining tail, and pour the waters of the Nile on every golden scale? How cheerfully he seems to grin, how neatly spreads his claws, and welcomes little fishes in with gently smiling jaws." "I'm sure those words are not right," said poor Alice, her eyes filling with tears again. "I must be Mabel, and I will have to live in that tiny little house, with hardly any toys to play with, and too many lessons to learn. No, I've made up my mind. If I'm Mabel, I will stay down here. They may say come up again, dear, but I will say, who am I then? Tell me that first, and then if I want to be that person, I'll come up. If not, I will stay down here until I'm someone else. But, oh dear," cried Alice with a sudden burst of tears, "I wish they would put their heads down. I am so very tired of being alone here." As she said this, she looked down at her hands and was surprised to see that she had put on one of the rabbit's small white gloves while talking. "How can I have done that?" she thought. "I must be getting small again." She got up and went to the table to measure herself, and found that she was now about 2 feet tall and quickly shrinking more. She soon realized that the fan she was holding was the reason, so she dropped it just in time to avoid disappearing completely. "That was a close call," said Alice, frightened by the sudden change, but glad to still be here. "Now to the garden." She ran back to the little door, but alas, the little door was closed again, and the little golden key was still on the glass table. "Things are worse than ever," thought the poor girl. "I've never been this small before. How awful this is." As she said this, she slipped and then, splash, She was up to her chin in salt water. At first, she thought she had fallen into the sea. In that case, I can go back by train, she told herself. Alice had been to the seaside once and thought of the beach with bathing boxes, children digging in the sand, and a railway station behind it. However, she quickly realized she was in the pool of tears she had cried when she was 9 feet tall. I wish I hadn't cried so much, said Alice as she paddled around, trying to find her way out. Now I am going to drown in my own tears. That will be so strange. But everything is strange today. Just then, she heard splashing somewhere nearby, and she swam closer to see what it was. At first, she thought it was a walrus or a hippopotamus, but then she remembered how small she was now, and soon realized it was only a mouse that had slipped in like her. Would it help to talk to this mouse? Alice wondered. Everything is so strange down here, it might be able to talk. Anyway, there's no harm in trying. She began, "Oh mouse, do you know the way out of this pool? I'm very tired of swimming around here." Alice thought this was the right way to speak to a mouse. She had never done this before but remembered it from her brother's Latin book, "The mouse of a mouse, to a mouse, oh mouse." The mouse looked at her and seemed to wink, but it said nothing. Maybe it doesn't understand English, thought Alice. Maybe it's a French mouse who came with William the Conqueror. Even with all her history knowledge, Alice didn't quite know the time of things. So she tried again. "Oh, you ist ma chat," which was the first sentence in her French book. The mouse suddenly jumped out of the water and seemed to shake with fright. "Oh, I'm so sorry," cried Alice quickly, afraid she had hurt the little mouse. "I forgot you didn't like cats." "Not like cats," squeaked the mouse in a loud voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Well, maybe not," said Alice kindly. "Please don't be angry. I wish I could show you our cat Dinah. I think you would like her. She's a quiet dear," Alice said half to herself as she paddled lazily in the pool. "She sits purring nicely by the fire, licking her paws and washing her face. She is soft and nice to hold and is great for catching mice." "Oh, I'm so sorry," cried Alice again, because now the mouse was all puffed up, and Alice felt it was offended. "We won't talk about her anymore if you don't want to." "We indeed," cried the mouse, trembling from head to tail. "As if I would talk about that. Our family always hated cats. Low, nasty things. Don't let me hear that name again." "I won't," said Alice quickly, eager to change the conversation. "Are you fond of dogs?" The mouse did not answer, so Alice went on eagerly. "There's a nice little dog near my house. A small, bright-eyed terrier with long, curly brown hair. He fetches things when you throw them, sits up, and begs for food, all sorts of things. I can't remember half of them. He belongs to a farmer, and he is so useful, he's worth £100. He says he kills all the rats and, oh dear," cried Alice sadly. "I think I've upset him again." The mouse was swimming away from her as quickly as it could, making a big splash in the pool. Alice called softly after it, "Mouse dear, please come back. We won't talk about cats or dogs if you don't want to." When the mouse heard this, it turned and swam slowly back to her. Its face was pale, Alice thought it was angry, and it said in a low, trembling voice, "Let's get to the shore, and then I will tell you my history, and you will understand why I hate cats and dogs." It was time to leave, for the pool was getting crowded with birds and animals that had fallen in. There were a duck, a dodo, a lory, an eaglet, and several other curious creatures. Alice led the way, and the whole group swam to the shore. Chapter 3. A caucus race and a long tail. Alice saw a funny group at the riverbank. The birds looked messy, and the animals were wet and uncomfortable. They needed to dry off. After a few minutes, Alice started to talk to them like she knew them all her life. She even had a small argument with the lorry. The lorry said, "I am older than you, so I know better." Alice wanted to know how old the lorry was, but it wouldn't tell her, so they stopped arguing. Then the mouse, who seemed to be the leader, said, "Sit down and listen to me. I'll help you dry off." Everyone quickly sat in a big circle, with the mouse in the middle. Alice watched the mouse closely, worried she would catch a cold if she didn't dry off soon. "Ahem," the mouse said. "Are you all ready? This is the driest thing I know. Be quiet, please. William the Conqueror." Said the lorry, shivering. "I beg your pardon," said the mouse, looking a bit mad. "Did you speak?" "Not me," said the lorry quickly. "I thought you did," said the mouse. "I will continue. Edwin and Morcar." "What for?" asked the duck. "What for?" said the mouse, annoyed. "Of course you know what it means." "I know what it means when I find something," said the duck. "But what did the archbishop find?" The mouse didn't answer but kept going, that he met. "How are you doing now?" it asked Alice. "As wet as ever," said Alice sadly. "It doesn't seem to work at all." "In that case," said the dodo, standing up, "I think we should take a caucus race to get dry." "What is a caucus race?" Alice asked. "Well," said the dodo, "the best way to explain it is to do it." First, the dodo drew a circle in the sand. There were no 1, 2, 3, go, but they began to run when they wanted and stopped when they wanted. So it was hard to know when the race ended. After about 30 minutes of running and drying off, the dodo finally called out, "The race is over." They all gathered around it, panting, and asked, who won. The dodo couldn't answer right away. It thought for a long time with one finger on its forehead. Then it said, "Everybody has won, and all must have prizes." "But who will give the prizes?" they asked. "Why, she will," said the dodo, pointing at Alice. Everyone crowded around her, shouting, "Prizes! Prizes!" Alice didn't know what to do. In despair, she put her hand in her pocket and pulled out a box of sweets. Luckily, it was dry. She handed them around as prizes. There was exactly one for everyone. "But she must have a prize herself," said the mouse. "Of course," said the dodo. "What else do you have in your pocket?" it asked Alice. "Just a thimble," said Alice sadly. "Give it to me," said the dodo. The dodo then presented the thimble, saying, "We present this elegant thimble to you." After this short speech, everyone cheered. Alice found it all very silly, but they looked so serious that she didn't dare laugh. She took the thimble and looked as serious as she could. Next, they began to eat the sweets, which caused some noise. The big birds complained they could not taste theirs, and the small ones choked and needed to be patted on the back. Finally, they all sat down in a circle and asked the mouse to tell them more stories. "You promised to tell me your story and why you hate cats and dogs," said Alice softly, hoping it wouldn't be offended again. "Mine is a long tale," said the mouse, sighing. "It is a long tale," said Alice, looking down at the mouse's tail. "But why do you call it sad?" She kept puzzling over this while the mouse spoke. Fury said to a mouse, the mouse began, "Let us go to court. I will prosecute you. Come, I'll take no denial, we must have the trial, for this morning I've nothing to do." The mouse continued, but then it suddenly stopped and looked at Alice. "What are you thinking?" it asked. "I'm sorry," said Alice. "You were at the fifth bend, I think." "I was not," cried the mouse angrily. "A knot," said Alice, wanting to help. "Oh, let me help untie it." "I will do nothing of the sort," said the mouse, getting up and walking away. You upset me by talking nonsense. I didn't mean it, pleaded Alice. But you're easily offended. The mouse only growled in reply. Come back and finish your story. Alice called after it. The others joined in too, saying, Yes, please do. But the mouse shook its head and walked away quickly. What a pity it wouldn't stay, said the Lory when the mouse was gone. An old crab told her daughter, Let this be a lesson to you, never lose your temper. Hold your tongue, Mum, said the young crab a bit sharply. You try the patience of an oyster. I wish I had Dinah here. Alice said out loud. She would fetch it back. And who is Dinah? Asked the Lory. Alice answered eagerly, Dinah is our cat. She's great at catching mice. Oh, I wish you could see her after the birds. She would eat a little bird right away. This made a big impression on the group. Some birds quickly flew away. One old magpie wrapped itself up and said, I must go home, the night air is not good for me. A canary called to its children, Come, my dear. It's time for bed. The others found excuses to leave and soon Alice was left alone. I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said sadly. Nobody seems to like her here, and she is the best cat in the world. Oh, my dear Dinah. Will I ever see you again? Alice began to cry again, feeling lonely. After a little while, she heard little feet pattering in the distance. She looked up eagerly, half hoping the mouse had changed its mind and was coming back to finish its story. Chapter 4. The rabbit sends in a little bill. The white rabbit was coming back slowly. It looked around as if it lost something. Alice heard it mumbling, The Duchess. Oh no. She will make me lose my head. Where did I drop them? Alice guessed it was looking for the fan and the white gloves. She kindly began to search for them, but they were not there. Everything seemed different since her swim in the pool, and the big hall with the glass table and the little door had completely disappeared. Soon, the rabbit saw Alice and shouted at her, Mary Ann, what are you doing? Go home right now and get me my gloves and fan. Quick! Alice was scared, so she ran in the direction the rabbit pointed, not trying to explain the mistake. He thinks I'm his maid, she thought while running. How surprised he will be when he finds out who I am. I better find his fan and gloves. She then saw a small house with a brass plate that said W, Rabbit. She walked in without knocking and hurried upstairs, worried she might meet the real Mary Ann and be kicked out before finding the fan and gloves. How strange this is, Alice thought. Doing errands for a rabbit. Maybe Dinah will ask me to run errands, too. She imagined how that might go. Miss Alice. Come here and get ready for your walk. Coming, nurse. But I must watch this mouse hole until Dinah comes back. Alice chuckled at the thought. Finally, she found a tidy room with a table by the window. On it was a fan and a few pairs of tiny white gloves. She picked up the fan and one pair of gloves. Just as she was about to leave, she noticed a little bottle near the mirror. It did not have a Drink Me label, but she opened it and took a sip. Something interesting always happens when I eat or drink something, she said. I hope this makes me big again. I'm tired of being tiny. It did make her big very fast. Before she had drunk half of it, her head touched the ceiling. She quickly put down the bottle. That's enough. I hope I don't grow any more. I still can't get out the door. Oh no. She kept growing. Soon she had to kneel down. In another moment, there was no room for that either, so she tried lying down with one arm against the door and the other round her head. Still, she grew. Finally, She put one arm out of the window and one foot up the chimney, saying, "Now I can do nothing more. What will happen to me?" Luckily for Alice, the magic bottle had finished its effect and she stopped growing. But it was still very uncomfortable. She felt sad because she could not get out of the room. It was much nicer at home, Alice thought sadly, when I wasn't always getting bigger and smaller and being told what to do by rabbits. I wish I hadn't gone down that rabbit hole, but it is kind of interesting. I wonder what happened to me. I used to think magic things never happened, and now here I am. There should be a book about me. When I grow up, I'll write one, but I'm grown up now, she added sadly, and there's no room to grow up here. But then, Alice thought, will I never get older? That's good in a way, never being an old woman, but I will always have lessons to learn. I wouldn't like that. Oh, foolish Alice, she told herself. How can you learn lessons here? There's hardly room for you, and no room for books. Then she thought about it for a while. Suddenly, she heard a voice outside. "Mary Ann! Mary Ann!" cried the voice. "Fetch me my gloves right now." Then she heard little feet running up the stairs. Alice knew it was the rabbit coming to find her. She shook with fear, forgetting she was now much larger than the rabbit. The rabbit came to the door and tried to open it, but Alice's elbow was pressed against it, so it didn't work. Alice heard the rabbit say, "I'll go around and get in the window." "You won't," thought Alice. After waiting until she thought she heard the rabbit under the window, she spread out her hand and tried to grab at the air. She didn't catch anything, but she heard a little shriek and the crash of broken glass, which made her think the rabbit might have fallen into something. Then she heard the rabbit angrily say, "Pat, where are you?" Then came a voice she had never heard before, "I'm here. Digging for apples." "Digging for apples," shouted the rabbit. "Come help me out of this." She heard more glass break. "Tell me, Pat, what's that in the window?" "It's an arm," said Pat, pronouncing it arum. "An arm. Who has ever seen one that size? It fills the whole window." "Of course it does, but it's still an arm. It shouldn't be there. Go take it away." Alice could hear whispers afterward, "I don't like it." "Do what I said, you coward." She spread her hand again and tried to grab again. This time, she heard 2 shrieks and more sounds of broken glass. What a lot of cucumber frames there must be, thought Alice. I wonder what they will do next. I only wish they could pull me out of the window. I don't want to stay here any longer. She waited for a while without hearing anything more. Then she heard little cartwheels and many voices talking together. "Where is the other ladder?" "I brought only one, Bill has the other." "Bill, bring it here. Put it up at this corner." "No, tie them together first. They don't reach high enough." "Oh, they'll do. Don't care. Bill, catch this rope. Will the roof hold? Watch out for that loose slate. Oh, it's coming down. Heads below." There was a loud crash now. Who did that? I think it was Bill. Who is going down the chimney? Not me. You do it. I won't. Bill is going down. Bill. The master says you must go down the chimney. Oh, so Bill has to come down, does he? Alice said to herself. They put everything on Bill. I wouldn't want to be Bill. This fireplace is small, but I think I can kick a little. She pushed her foot down the chimney as much as she could. She heard a little animal scratching and scrambling above her. Then, saying to herself, "This is Bill," she gave a quick kick and waited to see what happened. First, everyone shouted, "There goes Bill." Then the rabbit called, "Catch him by the hedge." After a moment, everyone was quiet, and then there was more talking. Hold up his head. Brandy now. Don't choke him. What happened to you, Bill? Tell us. Finally, a weak, squeaky voice said, Well, I don't know. I don't need more, thank you. I'm better now, but I'm too flustered to tell you. All I know is, something came at me like a jack-in-the-box, and up I went like a rocket. So you did, Bill, said the others. We must burn the house, said the rabbit. Alice yelled, If you do, I'll send Dinah after you. There was silence right away. Alice thought, I wonder what they will do next. If they had any sense, they'd take the roof off. After a minute, they started moving again. Alice heard the rabbit say, A load will do to start with. A load of what? Thought Alice. But she didn't have long to wonder, because next, little stones fell in through the window and some hit her face. I'll stop this, she told herself, and shouted, You better not do that again. This brought more silence. Alice noticed that the little stones were changing into little cakes on the floor. An idea popped into her head. If I eat one of the cakes, she thought, it is sure to change my size. I know it can't make me bigger, so it must make me smaller. She quickly ate one of the cakes and was happy to see herself getting smaller. As soon as she could fit through the door, she ran out of the house and found a group of little animals and birds waiting outside. The poor little lizard, Bill, was in the middle, held up by 2 guinea pigs, who were giving him a drink from a bottle. They all rushed at Alice when she appeared, but she ran away as fast as she could and soon found herself safe in a thick forest. The first thing I need to do, said Alice to herself, is grow back to my right size. Then I will find my way to that lovely garden. I think that is the best plan. That did sound like a good plan, but the only problem was that she didn't know how to do it. While looking around among the trees, she heard a sharp bark above her and looked up quickly. A big puppy was looking down at her with large round eyes and trying to touch her with its paw. Poor little thing, said Alice in a kind voice, trying to whistle to it. But she was scared that it might be hungry and would try to eat her. Not knowing what she was doing, she picked up a little stick and held it out to the puppy. The puppy jumped into the air with a happy bark, rushed at the stick, and pretended to gnaw it. Alice ducked behind a big thistle to avoid being run over. When she peeked from the other side, the puppy again rushed at the stick and tumbled over in its hurry to grab it. Alice thought it was just like playing with a huge cart horse, and she felt like she was almost going to be trampled, so she ran around the thistle again. The puppy started running short distances at the stick, going a little forwards and a long way back, barking loudly, until it finally sat down far away, panting with its tongue out. This seemed like a good chance for Alice to escape, so she ran until she was very tired and out of breath. And yet what a dear little puppy, said Alice, resting against a buttercup and fanning herself with a leaf. I would have liked to teach it tricks a lot if I'd been the right size. Oh dear. I almost forgot I must grow again. Let me see, how can I do it? I suppose I need to eat or drink something, but what? That was a big question. Alice looked around at the flowers and grass, but didn't see anything to eat or drink. Nearby was a large mushroom that was about her height. After checking underneath it, on both sides, and behind it, she thought it made sense to see what was on top. She stood on her tiptoes and peeked over. On top was a large blue caterpillar sitting with its arms crossed, smoking a long hookah, and not paying any attention to her. Chapter 5. Advice from a Caterpillar. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other for a while in silence. Finally, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth and said in a lazy voice, "Who are you?" This was not a good start for a conversation. Alice answered shyly, "I don't know, sir. I know who I was this morning, but I think I have changed a lot since then. What do you mean? Asked the caterpillar sternly. Explain. I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, said Alice. Because I don't feel like myself. I don't see, said the caterpillar. I can't explain it better, Alice replied politely. I don't understand it myself. Being so many sizes in one day is confusing. It's not, said the caterpillar. Well, maybe you haven't felt it yet, said Alice, but when you turn into a chrysalis, you will feel strange. Not at all, said the caterpillar. Maybe you feel different, said Alice. But it would feel very strange to me. You, said the caterpillar. Who are you? This brought them back to the beginning of their conversation. Alice felt a little annoyed by the short answers from the caterpillar. She sat up straight and said very seriously, I think you should tell me who you are first. Why? Asked the caterpillar. This was another confusing question, and Alice could not think of a good answer. The caterpillar seemed very grumpy, so she turned away. Come back, called the caterpillar. I have something important to say. This sounded interesting, so Alice turned back. Keep your temper, said the caterpillar. Is that all? Asked Alice, trying to keep calm. No, said the caterpillar. Alice thought she might as well wait since she had nothing else to do. Maybe it would tell her something useful. For some minutes, the caterpillar smoked the hookah without speaking. Then it unfolded its arms, took the hookah out of its mouth, and said, So you think you're changed? I'm afraid I am, sir, Alice replied. I can't remember things as I used to, and I don't stay the same size for very long. Can't remember what? Asked the caterpillar. Well, I tried to say how doth the little busy bee, but it came out wrong. Alice said sadly. Repeat you are old, Father William, said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. You are old, Father William, the young man said. And your hair has become very white. And yet you stand on your head. Do you think it is right? In my youth, Father William replied to his son. I feared it might hurt my brain. But now that I know I have none, I do it again and again. You are old, said the youth, as I mentioned before, and have grown very fat. Yet you turned a back somersault at the door. What is the reason for that? In my youth, said the sage, shaking his grey hair, I kept my body very supple. With this ointment, 1 shilling a box. Let me sell you a couple. You are old, said the youth, and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. How did you manage to do that? In my youth, said his father, I took to the law and argued each case with my wife. The strong jaws I got from that have lasted all my life. You are old, said the youth, one would not suppose that your eye is steady as ever. Yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so clever? I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough, said his father. Don't be so proud. Do you think I can listen to this all day? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs. That is not correct, said the caterpillar. Not quite right, I'm afraid, said Alice, shyly. Some of the words are wrong. It is wrong from beginning to end, said the caterpillar firmly, and there was silence for a few minutes. The caterpillar spoke first. What size do you want to be? It asked. Oh, I'm not very particular about size, Alice replied quickly. I just don't like changing so much. I don't know, said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. No one had ever disagreed with her like this before, and she felt like losing her temper. Are you happy now? Asked the caterpillar. Well, I would like to be a little bigger, sir, if you don't mind, said Alice. 3 inches is a sad height. That is a very good height, said the caterpillar angrily, standing up straight. It was exactly 3 inches tall. But I'm not used to it, poor Alice pleaded. I wish everyone wouldn't get offended so easily. You will get used to it in time, said the caterpillar. It took its hookah again and began to smoke. This time Alice waited until it decided to speak again. After a minute, the caterpillar took the hookah out of its mouth, yawned a couple of times, and shook itself. Then it went down from the mushroom and crawled away into the grass, saying, "One side will make you taller, and the other side will make you shorter." One side of what? The other side of what? Thought Alice. The mushroom, said the caterpillar, as if she had asked it out loud, and soon it was out of sight. Alice thought about which were the 2 sides of the mushroom. It was round, so this was hard to figure out. Finally, she reached around it as far as she could, breaking off a piece with each hand. And now which is which? She said to herself, nibbling a bit of the right-hand piece to see what would happen. Suddenly, she felt a hard hit under her chin. It was her foot. She was scared but knew she had to hurry, because she was shrinking fast. She quickly ate some of the other piece. Her chin was pressed so closely to her foot that she could hardly open her mouth, but she did it and swallowed a bit of the left-hand piece. "Come, my head is free at last," said Alice happily. But then she got scared again, when she saw that her shoulders were gone. All she could see when looking down was a long neck, like a stalk rising from a sea of green leaves below her. What can all that green stuff be? She wondered. Where are my shoulders? Oh, my poor hands, where are you? She waved her arms, but nothing happened except some shaking among the leaves. Since she couldn't lift her hands to her head, she tried to lower her head. She was happy to see that her neck could twist easily like a snake. She managed to curve her neck down into a zigzag shape, ready to dive among the leaves, which she saw were just the tops of the trees. But then a sharp hiss made her pull back. A big pigeon flew into her face and began to hit her with its wings. "Serpent," screeched the pigeon. "I'm not a serpent," said Alice angrily. "Leave me alone." "Serpent, I say," said the pigeon again, but more quietly, adding with a sob, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to scare them." "I have no idea what you mean," said Alice. "I've tried roots, banks, and hedges," the pigeon continued without listening. "But those serpents, there's no pleasing them." Alice was more confused but decided to stay quiet until the pigeon was done talking. As if it wasn't enough trouble to hatch eggs, the pigeon said, "I have to look out for serpents all day. I haven't slept in 3 weeks." "I'm sorry you've had trouble," said Alice, beginning to understand. "And just when I took the highest tree in the woods," the pigeon cried, "and just when I thought I was free, they wriggled down from the sky. Ooh, serpent." "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you," said Alice. I'm a. "Well, what are you?" asked the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to make something up." "I'm a little girl," Alice said doubtfully, remembering all the changes she had gone through that day. "A likely story," said the pigeon with a sneer. "I have seen many little girls, but never one with such a neck." "No, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I bet you'll say next that you never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs," said Alice, who was honest. "But little girls eat eggs just like serpents." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "If they do, then they're a kind of serpent, that's all I can say." This was a new idea to Alice, and she was silent for a minute. This allowed the pigeon to say, "You're looking for eggs. I know that well, and what does it matter to me if you are a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters to me," Alice said quickly, "but I'm not looking for eggs. If I was, I wouldn't want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, go away then," said the pigeon, sulky as it settled back into its nest. Alice ducked down among the trees as best she could, her neck getting stuck in the branches. She had to stop and untwist it here and there. After a bit, she remembered she still held pieces of the mushroom. She started nibbling carefully, first one piece and then the other, growing taller sometimes and shorter at other times until she finally got back to her usual height. It had been so long since she was a normal size that it felt very strange, but she got used to it quickly and began talking to herself again. Half my plan is done. How puzzling all these changes are. I'm never sure what I will be from one moment to another. But now I'm back to my right size. The next thing is to get to that lovely garden. How can I do that? Just then, she discovered a small house about 4 feet high. Whoever lives there, Alice thought, it wouldn't be good to meet them like this. I would scare them. So she started nibbling the right-hand piece again, and didn't come close to the house until she was 9 inches tall. Chapter 6. Pig and Pepper. Alice stood by the house, thinking about what to do. Suddenly, a footman ran out of the woods. He wore a uniform. Alice thought he looked like a fish because of his face. He knocked loudly on the door. Another footman opened the door. This one had a round face and big eyes like a frog. Both footmen had curly, powdered hair. Alice was very curious and moved closer to listen. The fish footman pulled out a big letter almost as big as him. He gave it to the frog footman and said seriously, "For the Duchess." An invitation from the Queen to play croquet. The frog footman repeated the same thing, but changed the words a little. They both bowed low, and their curls got stuck together. Alice giggled at this and ran back into the woods, afraid they would hear her. When she peeked out again, the fish footman was gone, and the frog footman was sitting and staring into the sky. Alice was shy but went to the door and knocked. "There's no use in knocking," said the frog footman. "First, because I'm on the same side of the door as you. Second, because it's too noisy inside. No one can hear you." Inside, a loud noise was happening, howling, sneezing, and crashing sounds like dishes breaking. "Then how can I get in?" asked Alice. "There might be sense in knocking if the door was between us," the frog footman said. "If you were inside, you could knock, and I could let you out." He looked up at the sky as he spoke, and Alice thought that was rude. But maybe he can't help it, she thought. His eyes are nearly at the top of his head. "Then how can I get in?" she asked again. "I will sit here till tomorrow." Just then, the door opened and a large plate flew out, nearly hitting the frog footman's nose. It crashed against a tree. Or the next day, the frog footman continued as if nothing had happened. "How can I get in?" Alice asked louder. "Are you even supposed to get in?" asked the frog footman. That's the first question. Alice didn't like this answer. "It's really awful," she said quietly, "how all the creatures argue. It makes me want to scream." The frog footman seemed to think this was a good time to repeat his remark. "I'll sit here on and off for days." "But what about me?" Alice asked. "Do anything you want," said the frog footman, and he started whistling. "Oh, talking to him is no good," Alice said, feeling hopeless. "He is very silly." With that, she opened the door and went inside. The kitchen was large and full of smoke. The Duchess sat on a 3-legged stool, holding a baby. The cook was stirring a big pot that smelled like soup. "There is too much pepper in that soup," Alice thought as she sneezed. There was too much pepper in the air. The Duchess sneezed from time to time, and the baby was sneezing and crying without stopping. The only ones that didn't sneeze were the cook and a big cat that sat on the hearth, grinning widely. "Please tell me," said Alice a bit shyly, because she wasn't sure if it was polite to speak first. Why is your cat grinning? It's a Cheshire Cat, said the Duchess. That's why. Pig. She said the last word very loudly, and Alice jumped. But she saw that the Duchess meant it for the baby, not her. So she felt brave and spoke again. I didn't know Cheshire Cats always grinned. I didn't know cats could grin. They all can, said the Duchess, and most do. I don't know any that do, Alice replied, feeling happy to be in a conversation. You don't know much, said the Duchess. That's a fact. Alice did not like this tone, so she tried to change the subject. While she thought about it, the cook took the pot off the fire and began throwing everything at the Duchess and the baby, first the fire tools, then a shower of pots, plates, and dishes. The Duchess didn't even care when they hit her, and the baby was crying so loudly that it was hard to know if it was hurt or not. Oh, please be careful, cried Alice, jumping up and down in fear. Oh no, there goes his precious nose, as a big pot flew by and nearly hit him. If everyone looked after their own business, said the Duchess in a rough voice, the world would go faster. That would not be good, said Alice, glad to show some of her knowledge. Just think how hard it would be for day and night. The Earth takes 24 hours to turn around on its axis. Talking of axes, said the Duchess, chop off her head. Alice looked worried at the cook to see if she would listen, but the cook was busy with the soup and did not pay attention. So Alice continued. 24 hours is what I think, or is it 12? Oh, don't bother me, said the Duchess. I never liked numbers. And she began to nurse her child and sang a lullaby while shaking the baby at the end of every line. Speak roughly to your little boy. And beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy. Because he knows it teases. Asterisk, asterisk, chorus, asterisk, asterisk. In which the cook and the baby joined. Wow! 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 As the Duchess sang the next verse, she shook the baby a lot, making it cry even louder. Alice could hardly hear the words. I speak severely to my boy. I beat him when he sneezes. For he can enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Asterisk, asterisk, chorus, asterisk, asterisk. Wow! 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 Here. You can nurse it if you want, said the Duchess, throwing the baby at Alice. I must go get ready to play croquet with the Queen. She hurried out of the room. The cook threw a frying pan after her but missed. Alice caught the baby with difficulty. It was a strange shape, its arms and legs were sticking out everywhere, like a starfish. The little thing snorted like a steam engine as Alice held it. It kept folding up and stretching out, and for a minute or two, it was hard for her to hold it. When Alice found the right way to hold it, which was to twist it into a knot and hold its right ear and left foot, she carried it outside. If I don't take this baby away, they will surely hurt it. Wouldn't it be awful to leave it? She said this out loud, and the baby grunted in reply. Don't grunt, said Alice. That's not a proper way to speak. The baby grunted again, and Alice looked closely into its face to see what was wrong. It had a very upturned nose, much like a pig's snout rather than a real nose. Also, its eyes were very small for a baby. Alice did not like the look of it at all. But maybe it's only crying, she thought, and looked for tears. No tears came. If you are going to turn into a pig, my dear, said Alice seriously, I won't have anything to do with you. Mind now. The baby grunted again, and they stayed quiet for a while. Alice began to wonder, what will I do with this creature when I take it home, when the baby grunted loudly, making Alice look down in alarm. This time, it clearly turned into a pig, and Alice thought it was silly for her to carry it any longer. So she set the little pig down and felt relieved to see it walk quietly into the woods. If it had grown up, it would have been a very ugly child. But it makes rather a nice pig, she thought. Alice began to think of other children she knew who might also make good pigs, when she was suddenly startled by seeing the Cheshire Cat sitting on a tree branch nearby. The cat only grinned at Alice. She thought it looked friendly, but it had very long claws and many teeth, so she felt she should be polite. Cheshire Cat, Alice said shyly, not sure if it liked the name. It just grinned wider. Well, it's pleased so far, thought Alice, and continued. Would you tell me which way I should go from here? That depends on where you want to go, said the cat. I don't care where, said Alice. Then it doesn't matter which way you go, said the cat. Just as long as I get somewhere, Alice added to explain. Oh, you are sure to get somewhere if you just walk long enough, said the cat. Alice felt this made sense, so she tried another question. What kind of people live around here? In that direction, said the cat, waving its right paw, lives a hatter. And in that direction, waving its other paw, lives a March hare. You can visit either if you want. They are both mad. But I don't want to go near mad people, Alice said. Oh, you can't help that, the cat said. We are all mad here. I'm mad. You're mad. How do you know I'm mad? Asked Alice. You must be, said the cat, or you wouldn't come here. Alice didn't think that proved anything, but she kept talking. How do you know you're mad? To start with, said the cat, a dog is not mad. Do you agree? I suppose so, said Alice. Well, the cat continued, you see a dog growls when angry and wags its tail when happy. I growl when I'm happy and wag my tail when I'm angry. So I'm mad. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like, said the cat. Do you play croquet with the Queen today? I'd like that a lot, said Alice, but I haven't been invited yet. You'll see me there, said the cat and vanished. Alice was not surprised. She was getting used to strange things happening. While she looked at where it had been, it suddenly came back. By the way, what happened to the baby? Asked the cat. I almost forgot to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice said quietly, as if it was normal. I thought so, said the cat, and then it vanished again. Alice waited a bit, half expecting it to appear again. But after a minute or two, she walked toward the March Hare's house. I have seen hatters before, she thought, but the March Hare will be more interesting. And since it's May, maybe it won't be as crazy as it was in March. While she thought this, she looked up and saw the cat again, sitting on a tree branch. Did you say pig or fig? Asked the cat. I said pig, Alice replied. I wish you wouldn't keep appearing and disappearing suddenly. You make me dizzy. All right, said the cat, and this time it slowly vanished, starting with its tail and the grin, which stayed longer than the rest. Well, I have seen a cat without a grin before, thought Alice, but a grin without a cat. That's the strangest thing I've ever seen. She hadn't gone much farther before she came to the March Hare's house. She thought it must be the right house, because the chimneys looked like ears and the roof was covered with fur. It was so big that she didn't want to get closer, until she had nibbled some more of the left mushroom piece to grow to about 2 feet high. Even then, she walked up to the house a bit nervously, saying to herself, what if it is mad after all? I almost wish I had visited the hatter instead. Chapter 7. A Mad Tea Party. Alice stood by the house, thinking about what to do next. Then, she saw the March Hare and the hatter having tea at a big table under a tree. A dormouse was between them, fast asleep. The March Hare and the hatter were resting their elbows on the dormouse like it was a pillow. That's not nice for the dormouse, thought Alice. But it is asleep, so maybe it doesn't mind. The table was big, but the three of them were all crowded together at one corner. When they saw Alice coming, they cried, "No room! No room!" "There's plenty of room," Alice said, annoyed. She sat down in a big armchair at the end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare nicely. Alice looked around the table, but saw only tea. "I don't see any wine," she said. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't polite to offer it," Alice said angrily. "It wasn't polite of you to sit down without asking," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," Alice replied. "It's set for a lot more than 3. "Your hair needs cutting," said the Hatter. He had been looking at Alice for a long time, and this was his first words. "You shouldn't make personal comments," Alice said seriously. "It's very rude." The Hatter's eyes got very wide. But all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Now this will be fun," thought Alice. "I can guess the answer." "Do you think you can find the answer?" asked the March Hare. "Yes," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," said the March Hare. "I do," Alice answered quickly. "At least, I mean what I say, that's the same thing." "Not the same thing at all," said the Hatter. "You might as well say I see what I eat is the same as I eat what I see." "You might also say," said the March Hare, "I like what I get is the same as I get what I like." "You might also say," added the Dormouse, still sleeping, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same for you," said the Hatter. Then they were quiet for a minute. Alice tried to remember what she knew about ravens and writing desks, but she didn't think of much. The Hatter broke the silence first. "What day is it?" he asked, looking at his watch, shaking it, and holding it to his ear. Alice thought a moment and said, "The 4th. "2 days wrong," sighed the Hatter. "I told you butter wouldn't work." He looked at the March Hare angrily. "It was the best butter," said the March Hare quietly. "Yes, but some crumbs got in too," grumbled the Hatter. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch and looked gloomily at it. Then he dipped it into his cup of tea and looked again. All he could think to say was, "It was the best butter." Alice looked at him with curiosity. "What a funny watch. It tells the day of the month, but not the time." "Why should it?" grumbled the Hatter. "Does your watch tell you what year it is?" "Of course not," Alice replied happily. "But that's because it stays the same year for so long." "That's just my case," said the Hatter. Alice felt puzzled. "I don't understand," she said politely. "The Dormouse is asleep again," said the Hatter. He poured hot tea on its nose. The Dormouse shook its head, opened its eyes, and said, "Of course." "That's what I was going to say." "Have you guessed the riddle?" asked the Hatter again. "No, I give up," Alice said. "What's the answer?" "I don't know," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed. "I think you should do something better with your time than ask riddles with no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do," said the Hatter, "you wouldn't say that." "Time is a he." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," said the Hatter, shaking his head. "You've never talked to time." "Maybe not," Alice said carefully, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." "That explains a lot," said the Hatter. "He won't stand being beaten. If you treat him well, he'll do almost anything with the clock. For example, if it's 9 o'clock in the morning, you just whisper to time and the clock goes round. 1:30, time for dinner." "Then I wish it was," the March Hare whispered to himself. "That sounds great," said Alice thoughtfully. "But then, I wouldn't be hungry for it." Not at first, maybe, said the Hatter. But you could keep it at 1:30 as long as you want. Is that how you do it? Asked Alice. The Hatter shook his head sadly. Not me. We argued last March, just before he went mad, he said, pointing at the March hare with his spoon. It was at the great concert by the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing. Twinkle, twinkle, little bat. How I wonder what you're at. Have you heard that song? I've heard something like it, said Alice. It goes like this, said the Hatter. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle. At this point, the Dormouse woke up and began singing in its sleep, twinkle, 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 and went on for so long that they had to pinch it to make it stop. Well, I only just finished the first verse, said the Hatter, when the Queen shouted, his killing time. Off with his head. How terrible, said Alice. And ever since then, the Hatter said sadly, he won't do anything I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now. Alice had a bright idea. Is that why you have so many tea things here? She asked. Yes, said the Hatter with a sigh. It's always tea time, and we have no time to wash anything. Then you keep moving around, I guess, asked Alice. Exactly, said the Hatter. As things get used. But what happens when you get to the beginning again? Alice asked gently. Let's change the subject, yawned the March hare. I'm tired of this. I vote the young lady tells us a story. I don't know one, said Alice, feeling nervous about telling a story. Then the Dormouse will, they cried. Wake up, Dormouse. And they pinched it on each side. The Dormouse slowly opened its eyes. I wasn't asleep, it said in a weak voice. I heard everything you said. Tell us a story, said the March hare. Yes, please do, begged Alice. Be quick about it, said the Hatter, or you'll fall asleep again before you finish. Once upon a time, there were 3 little sisters. The Dormouse began quickly, and their names were Elsie, Lacey, and Tilly, and they lived at the bottom of a well. What did they live on? Asked Alice, who loved questions about food. They lived on treacle, said the Dormouse after thinking for a moment. They couldn't do that. Alice said gently. They'd be sick. So they were, said the Dormouse. Very sick. Alice tried to picture what living like that would be like, but it was too hard, so she asked, but why did they live at the bottom of a well? Have some more tea, said the March hare very seriously. I haven't had any yet, Alice replied. So I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, said Alice. Who's making personal remarks now? Said the Hatter proudly. Alice didn't know what to say, so she took some tea and bread and butter. Then she turned back to the Dormouse and asked again, why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse thought again for a minute, then said, it was a treacle well. There's no such thing. Alice started angrily, but the Hatter and the March hare said, sure. Sure. And the Dormouse said sulkily, if you can't be polite, you should finish the story yourself. No, please go on. Alice said humbly. I won't interrupt again. I'm sure there may be one. One, indeed, said the Dormouse angrily. However, it agreed to keep talking. So these 3 little sisters were learning to draw, it continued. They drew all kinds of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M? Asked Alice. Why not? Asked the March hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse closed its eyes again and started to fall asleep, but the Hatter pinched it and it woke up with a little cry and went on. That begins with M, like mousetraps and the moon, and memory, and muchness. You know you say things are much of a muchness. Have you ever seen a drawing of a muchness? I really don't know, said Alice, confused. I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This rude remark made Alice very angry. She stood up in disgust and walked away. The Dormouse fell asleep right away, and the others didn't even notice she was gone. She looked back a couple of times, half hoping they would call her back, but the last time she saw them, they were trying to put the Dormouse into the teapot. I'll never go there again, said Alice as she walked through the woods. It's the silliest tea party I've ever been to. Just as she said this, she saw a door in one of the trees. That's interesting, she thought. But everything is interesting today. I might as well go in. So she went inside. Once again, she found herself back in the long hall and close to the little glass table. I'll do better this time, she said. She took the little golden key and unlocked the door to the garden. Then she nibbled the mushroom. She kept a piece in her pocket until she was 1 foot tall. Then Alice walked down the little passage and finally found herself in the beautiful garden, among bright flowers and cool fountains. Chapter 8. The Queen's Croquet Ground. Alice saw a big rose tree near the entrance of the garden. The roses were white, and 3 gardeners were painting them red. Alice thought this was very strange. She moved closer to watch them. Just as she got near, she heard one gardener say, "Watch out, 5. Don't splash paint on me." "I couldn't help it," said 5. 7 bumped my elbow. "That's right, 5. Always blame others," said 7. "You should not talk," said 5. "I heard the Queen say you deserve to lose your head." "What for?" asked the first gardener. "That's none of your business, too," said 7. "Yes, it is his business," said 5. "I'll tell him it was for bringing tulip roots instead of onions." 7 threw down his paintbrush and began to say, "Well, of all the unfair things," when he saw Alice and stopped talking. The others looked at Alice and bowed low. "Could you tell me," asked Alice shyly, "why you are painting those roses?" 5 and 7 did not answer, but looked at 2. 2 began to say quietly, "Well, you see, miss, this should be a red rose tree, but we put in a white one by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we'll lose our heads. So we're trying to fix it before she comes." At that moment, 5, who was looking worried, shouted, "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners quickly lay flat on their faces. Alice heard many footsteps and looked eagerly to see the Queen. First, 10 soldiers came, carrying clubs shaped like the gardeners. Next came 10 courtiers, decorated with diamonds. They walked 2 by 2, just like the soldiers. After them came the royal children, 10 happy little ones holding hands. Lastly, there were the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was unsure if she should lie flat like the gardeners, but she thought, what's the point of a parade if everyone lies down? So she stood still and waited. When the procession reached Alice, they all stopped and looked at her. The Queen said sternly, "Who is this?" She asked the Knave of Hearts, who just bowed and smiled. "Idiot," said the Queen, tossing her head angrily. Turning to Alice, she asked, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, Your Majesty," said Alice politely. But she thought to herself, they are just a pack of cards. I shouldn't be afraid of them. "And who are these?" asked the Queen, pointing to the gardeners who were still lying flat by the rose tree. She could not see what they were since they matched the cards. "How should I know?" Alice said, surprising herself with her bravery. "It's none of my business." The Queen turned very red with anger. After staring at Alice like a wild animal, she shouted, "Off with her head." "Off." "Nonsense," Alice said loudly and firmly. The Queen stopped. The King gently touched Alice's arm. "Dear, she's just a child." The Queen turned away angrily and said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave carefully turned the gardeners over with his foot. "Get up," shouted the Queen, and the 3 gardeners jumped up, bowing to the King, the Queen, the royal children, and everyone else. "Stop that," screamed the Queen. "You make me dizzy." Then she turned to the rose tree and asked, "What have you been doing here?" "Your Majesty," said 2, kneeling down, "we were trying." "I see," said the Queen, looking at the roses. "Off with their heads." The procession moved on, and 3 soldiers stayed behind to execute the gardeners, who ran to Alice for help. "You won't be beheaded," said Alice, placing them in a large flower pot nearby. The soldiers searched for the gardeners for a minute and then walked off after the others. "Are their heads gone?" shouted the Queen. "Their heads are gone, if it pleases your Majesty," the soldiers shouted back. "Good," shouted the Queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent and looked at Alice, as the Queen meant the question for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," bellowed the Queen, and Alice joined the group, wondering what would happen next. "It's a very fine day," said a nervous voice beside her. It was the White Rabbit, looking worried and peeking into her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Hush! Hush!" said the rabbit in a low voice. He looked over his shoulder, then stood on tiptoe, put his mouth to her ear, and whispered, "She is to be executed." "What for?" asked Alice. "Did you say how sad?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't," said Alice. "I said, what for?" "She slapped the Queen," replied the rabbit. Alice laughed. "Oh, sure," whispered the rabbit, frightened. "The Queen will hear you." She came late, and the Queen said, "Get to your places," shouted the Queen in a loud voice. The soldiers and everyone began running about and bumping into each other. They quickly settled down, and the game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a strange croquet ground. It was full of hills and valleys. The balls were live hedgehogs, the mallets were live flamingos, and the soldiers had to bend down and stand on their hands and feet to make the arches. Alice found it hard to control the flamingo. She managed to tuck it comfortably under her arm, but just as she was going to hit the hedgehog, the flamingo twisted around and looked at her with a confused face. She couldn't help laughing. Then, when she got the flamingo's head down, the hedgehog crawled away. Also, there were always bumps in the way wherever she wanted to send the hedgehog, and the soldiers kept getting up and walking off, making it a very difficult game. Everyone played at once without waiting for their turn. They argued and fought for the hedgehogs. Soon, the Queen got very angry and yelled, "Off with his head." Off with her head, about once a minute. Alice felt very uneasy. She had not had a fight with the Queen yet, but she knew it could happen any minute. What would happen to me? They love to behead people. How is there anyone left alive? She looked for a way to escape, but wondered if she could get away without being seen when she noticed something strange in the air. It puzzled her at first, but soon she realized it was a grin. "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I can talk to someone." "How are you doing?" said the cat when its mouth was big enough to speak. Alice waited until she saw its eyes and then nodded. "It's no use speaking until its ears come," she thought. In a moment, the whole head appeared, and Alice put down her flamingo and began to tell the cat about the game, feeling happy to have someone to listen. The cat seemed to think that was enough to show, and it went away. "I don't think they play fair," Alice started with a complaining tone. "They fight so much that I can't hear myself think. They have no rules. If there are, nobody follows them. And with everything being alive, it gets confusing. For example, there's the arch I need to go through next, and I would have hit the Queen's hedgehog, but it ran away when it saw me." "How do you like the Queen?" asked the cat quietly. "Not at all," said Alice. She's so very just then, she saw that the Queen was behind her listening. So she said, likely to win, that it's hardly worth the time to finish the game. The Queen smiled and passed on. "Who are you talking to?" asked the King, coming up to Alice and looking at the cat's head with curiosity. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat," said Alice. "Let me introduce it." "I don't like how it looks," said the King. "But it may kiss my hand if it wants." "I'd rather not," said the cat. "Don't be rude," said the King. "And don't look at me like that." He hid behind Alice. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I read that somewhere, but I can't remember where." "Well, it must go," said the King firmly, and he called to the Queen, who was passing by. "My dear, please have this cat removed." The Queen had only one way to settle problems. "Off with its head," she said without looking back. "I'll get the executioner myself," said the King eagerly, and he rushed away. Alice thought she might go back and see how the game was going since she heard the Queen shouting angrily. She had heard the Queen sentence 3 players to be executed for missing their turns. She didn't like how things looked, as the game was messy, and she never knew if it was her turn. So she looked for her hedgehog. The hedgehog was fighting another hedgehog, and Alice thought this was a good chance to hit one with the other. But her flamingo was across the garden, trying to fly up into a tree. By the time she got the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over and both hedgehogs were gone. It doesn't matter, Alice thought. All the arches are gone from this side of the ground. She tucked the flamingo under her arm so it wouldn't escape again, and went back to talk to her friend. When Alice got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was surprised to see a big crowd around it. There was a fight between the executioner, the King, and the Queen, all talking at once, while everyone else stayed quiet and looked nervous. When Alice appeared, they all looked at her to settle the argument. They repeated their points to her, but since they all spoke at once, she found it hard to understand. The executioner said you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body. He had never done this before and did not want to start now. The King said anything with a head could be beheaded and not to talk nonsense. The Queen said if nothing was done quickly, she'd have everyone executed. This last remark made everyone look serious. Alice thought for a moment and said, "It belongs to the Duchess." "You should ask her." "She's in prison," said the Queen to the executioner. "Bring her here." The executioner rushed off like a bullet. The cat's head began to disappear as soon as he was gone. By the time the executioner came back with the Duchess, the cat's head was gone. The King and the executioner ran around looking for it, while the others went back to the game. Chapter 9. The Mock Turtle Story. Alice was happy to see the Duchess again. The Duchess linked her arm with Alice's and they walked together. Alice thought it was nice to see the Duchess in a good mood. She wondered if the pepper made her angry before. When I am a Duchess, Alice thought, I will not have any pepper in my kitchen. Soup tastes good without it. Maybe pepper makes people mad, and vinegar makes them sour. I think barley sugar makes children sweet. I wish people knew that. Then they wouldn't be stingy with it. She forgot the Duchess for a moment and was surprised when she heard the Duchess's voice near her ear. You are thinking about something, dear, and you forget to talk. I can't tell you the moral of that now, but I will remember it soon. Maybe it doesn't have one, Alice said. Tut, tut, child, said the Duchess. Everything has a moral, if you can find it. She pressed herself closer to Alice. Alice didn't like this. The Duchess was very ugly, and her chin was sharp against Alice's shoulder. Still, Alice tried to be polite. "The game is going better now," she said to keep talking. "Yes, it is," said the Duchess. "And the moral of that is, oh, it's love that makes the world go round." "Someone once said," Alice whispered, "that it's all done by everyone minding their own business." "Well, that means the same thing," said the Duchess, poking her chin into Alice's shoulder. "And the moral of that is, take care of the scents, and the sounds will take care of themselves." Why does she love finding morals? Alice thought. "I dare say you wonder why I don't put my arm around your waist," said the Duchess after a pause. "It's because I'm not sure your flamingo's temper. Should I try it?" "He might bite," Alice said carefully. She didn't want the Duchess to try. "Very true," said the Duchess. "Flamingos and mustard can bite. And the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard isn't a bird," Alice pointed out. "Right, as always," said the Duchess. "You explain things clearly." "It's a mineral, I think," said Alice. "Of course it is," said the Duchess, who seemed to agree with whatever Alice said. "There's a big mustard mine here. And the moral of that is, the more I have, the less you have." "Oh, I know," exclaimed Alice, not really paying attention. "It's a vegetable." "It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I agree with you," said the Duchess. "And the moral is, be what you seem to be. Or if you want it simpler, never imagine that you are not what it seems to others." "I think I would understand that better if I saw it written down," said Alice politely. "But I can't follow it." "That's nothing compared to what I could say if I wanted," said the Duchess happily. "Please don't say any more than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. "I give you everything I've said as a present." "That's a cheap gift," thought Alice. "I'm glad they don't give birthday presents like that." But she didn't say it out loud. Thinking again, asked the Duchess, poking Alice with her chin. "I have a right to think," Alice said a little angrily. She began to feel worried. "About as much right," said the Duchess, "as pigs have to fly." But just then, to Alice's surprise, the Duchess's voice faded away, even when she was saying her favourite word, moral. The arm linked to Alice began to tremble. Alice looked up, and the Queen stood in front of them with her arms crossed, looking very angry. "It's a fine day, Your Majesty," the Duchess began softly. "I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen, stamping her foot. "Either you or your head must be off in no time. Take your pick." The Duchess chose quickly and disappeared. "Let's go on with the game," said the Queen to Alice. Alice was too scared to say anything and slowly followed her back to the croquet ground. The other guests had taken a break while the Queen was gone. But as soon as they saw her, they hurried back to the game. The Queen said that a moment's delay would cost them their lives. While playing, the Queen kept arguing with everyone, shouting "off with his head," or "off with her head." Those she sentenced were taken away by the soldiers. This made it hard for Alice to know if it was her turn or not because so many archers were gone. By the end of about half an hour, most players besides the King, the Queen, and Alice were in custody and waiting to be executed. Then the Queen stopped playing, sounding very tired. She asked Alice, "Have you seen the mock turtle yet?" "No," said Alice. "What is a mock turtle?" "It's what mock turtle soup is made of," explained the Queen. "I've never seen one or heard of one," said Alice. "Come on then," said the Queen, "and he can tell you his story." As they walked, Alice heard the King say quietly, "You are all pardoned." That's good, she thought, feeling much better about all the executions the Queen had ordered. They quickly came to a griffin, lying asleep in the sun. If you don't know what a griffin is, look at the picture. "Get up, lazy thing," the Queen shouted. Take this young lady to see the Mock Turtle and hear his story. I must go back to take care of the executions," and she walked off, leaving Alice alone with the Griffin. Alice didn't like how the Griffin looked, but she thought it was safer to stay with it than follow the scary Queen, so she waited. The Griffin sat up, rubbed its eyes, and watched the Queen until she was gone. Then it chuckled and said, "What fun!" "What is the fun?" asked Alice. "Why, she," said the Griffin. "It's all her fancy. They never execute anybody, you know. Come on." "Everybody says come on here," Alice thought as she followed it. "I've never been given so many orders in my life." They didn't walk far before they saw the Mock Turtle sitting lonely on a rock. As they got closer, Alice heard him sigh like he was very sad. She felt sorry for him. "What's wrong?" she asked the Griffin. "It's all his fancy," said the Griffin. "He has no sorrow. Come on." So they approached the Mock Turtle, who looked at them with sad eyes full of tears but said nothing. "This young lady," said the Griffin, "wants to hear your story." "I'll tell it to her," said the Mock Turtle in a deep voice. "Sit down, both of you, and don't say a word until I finish." They sat down. No one spoke for a few minutes. Alice thought, "I don't see how he can ever finish if he doesn't start." But she waited patiently. "Once," said the Mock Turtle with a big sigh, "I was a real turtle." There was a long silence. The only sounds were the Griffin making HJCKRH noises and the Mock Turtle sobbing. Alice almost got up to say, "Thank you for your story," but she thought there must be more, so she stayed quiet. "When we were little," the Mock Turtle began again, calmer, but still crying a bit, "we went to school in the sea. The teacher was an old turtle, we called him Tortoise." "Why did you call him Tortoise if he wasn't one?" asked Alice. "We called him Tortoise because he taught us," said the Mock Turtle angrily. "Really, you are very dull. You should be ashamed of yourself for asking such a simple question," added the Griffin. They both looked at Alice, who felt embarrassed. Finally, the Griffin said, "Come on, tell your story, old friend. Don't take all day." And he continued, "Yes, we went to school in the sea, even if you don't believe me." "I never said I didn't." Alice interrupted. "You did," the Mock Turtle said. "Be quiet," said the Griffin before Alice could talk again. The Mock Turtle went on. "We had the best education. We went to school every day." "I've been to a day school too," said Alice. "You don't have to be so proud." "With extras?" asked the Mock Turtle anxiously. "Yes," replied Alice. "We learned French and music." "And washing?" asked the Mock Turtle. "Not at all," said Alice, surprised. "Ah? That's why your school wasn't really good," said the Mock Turtle. "At ours, we had the end of the bill say French, music, and washing extra." "You couldn't have needed it much living at the bottom of the sea," said Alice. "I couldn't afford to learn it," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "I just took the normal course." "What was that?" asked Alice. "Reeling and writhing, of course, to start with," said the Mock Turtle. "Then different branches of arithmetic, ambition, distraction, uglification, and derision." "I never heard of uglification," Alice said. "What is it?" The Griffin looked surprised. "Never heard of uglifying," it exclaimed. "You know what to beautify means, right?" "Yes," said Alice, "it means to make something pretty." "Well then," said the Griffin, "if you don't know uglify, you are silly." Alice didn't want to ask any more questions, so she turned to the Mock Turtle. "What else did you learn?" "Well, there was mystery," replied the Mock Turtle, counting on his flippers. "Mystery, ancient and modern, and seaography. Then there was drawling. The drawling master was an old eel who came once a week. He taught us drawling, stretching, and fainting in coils. "What was that like?" asked Alice. "I can't show you," said the Mock Turtle. "I'm too stiff." And the Griffin never learned it. "I didn't have time," said the Griffin. "I went to the classical master, who was an old crab." "I never went to him," said the Mock Turtle with a sigh. "He taught laughing and grief," they said. "So he did," said the Griffin, sighing too, and both creatures hid their faces in their paws. "How many hours did you study each day?" asked Alice, wanting to change the subject. 10 hours the first day," said the Mock Turtle. 9 the next day, and so on. "What a peculiar plan," Alice said. "That's why they're called lessons," said the Griffin. "Because they lesson each day." This was a new idea for Alice, and she thought about it before she spoke next. "Then the 11th day must be a holiday." "Of course it was," said the Mock Turtle. "How did you manage on the 12th?" Alice asked eagerly. "That's enough about lessons," the Griffin added decisively. "Tell her something about the games now." Chapter 10. The Lobster Quadrille. The Mock Turtle sighed and wiped his eyes. He looked at Alice and tried to speak, but he could only cry for a minute. "It's like he has a bone in his throat," said the Griffin, and then he shook the Mock Turtle and patted his back. Finally, the Mock Turtle stopped crying and, with tears on his cheeks, said, "You may not have lived much under the sea." "I haven't," said Alice. "And you may not have met a lobster," Alice started to say. "I once tasted," but she stopped and said, "No, never." "So you have no idea how wonderful a lobster quadrille is?" "No, I don't," said Alice. "What kind of dance is it?" "Well," said the Griffin, "you first stand in a line by the sea." "2 lines," cried the Mock Turtle. "Seals, turtles, and so on. Then, when you clear away the jellyfish." "That takes time," interrupted the Griffin. "You move forward twice." "Each with a lobster as your partner," cried the Griffin. "Of course," the Mock Turtle said. "Move forward twice, set to partners." "Change lobsters and go back in the same way," continued the Griffin. "Then," the Mock Turtle continued, "you throw the lobsters," shouted the Griffin, jumping into the air. "As far out to sea as you can." "Swim after them," yelled the Griffin. "Do a somersault in the sea," cried the Mock Turtle, jumping around wildly. "Change lobsters again," yelled the Griffin. "Back to the land, and that's all for the first part," said the Mock Turtle. Suddenly he became quiet, and the 2 creatures sat down sadly, looking at Alice. "It must be a lovely dance," said Alice quietly. "Would you like to see a little of it?" asked the Mock Turtle. "Yes, very much," said Alice. "Let's try the first part," said the Mock Turtle to the Griffin. "We can do it without lobsters. Who will sing?" "Oh, you sing," said the Griffin. "I've forgotten the words." So they began to dance around Alice, sometimes stepping on her toes when they got too close, and waving their forepaws to keep the beat while the Mock Turtle sang slowly and sadly. "Will you walk a little faster?" said a whiting to a snail. "There's a porpoise close behind us, and he's stepping on my tail." See how eagerly the lobsters and the turtles all advance. They are waiting on the beach. Will you come and join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? You can't imagine how lovely it will be when they take us and throw us, with the lobsters, out to sea. But the snail replied, too far, and looked away. He thanked the whiting kindly, but would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not join the dance. Would not, could not, would not, could not join the dance. What does it matter how far we go? His fish friend replied. There is another shore, you know, on the other side. The farther from England, the closer to France. Then turn not pale, dear snail, but come and join the dance. Will you, won't you, will you, won't you, will you join the dance? Will you, won't you, will you, won't you join the dance? Thank you, it's a very interesting dance to watch, said Alice, feeling happy it was finally over. I like that strange song about the whiting. Oh, the whiting, said the Mock Turtle. You've seen them, of course. Yes, said Alice. I often saw them at Din. She quickly stopped. I don't know where Dinah is, said the Mock Turtle, but if you've seen them often, you know what they look like. I think so, said Alice thoughtfully. They have their tails in their mouths, and they are covered in crumbs. You're wrong about the crumbs, said the Mock Turtle. Crumbs wash off in the sea. But they do have their tails in their mouths, and the reason is, the Mock Turtle yawned and closed his eyes. Tell her why, he said to the Griffin. The reason is, said the Griffin, that they would go with the lobsters to the dance. Then they got thrown out to sea. Then they fell very far. Then they got their tails stuck in their mouths. Then they couldn't get them out. That's all. Thank you, said Alice. It's very interesting. I never knew so much about a whiting before. I can tell you more if you like, said the Griffin. Do you know why it's called a whiting? I never thought about it, said Alice. Why? It does the boots and shoes, said the Griffin very seriously. Alice was very puzzled. Does the boots and shoes, she said with surprise. Why, what do you make your shoes shine with, said the Griffin. What makes them so shiny? Alice looked down at her shoes and thought before she answered. They shine with blacking, I believe. Boots and shoes under the sea, the Griffin said in a low voice, shine with whiting. Now you know. And what are they made of? Asked Alice, curious. Soles and eels, of course, said the Griffin, sounding impatient. Any shrimp could tell you that. If I was the whiting, Alice said, still thinking about the song, I would say to the porpoise, stay back, please. We don't want you with us. They had to take him with them, said the Mock Turtle. No wise fish goes anywhere without a porpoise. Really, said Alice, surprised. Of course not, said the Mock Turtle. If a fish came to me and said he was going on a trip, I would ask, with what purpose? Don't you mean purpose? Asked Alice. I mean what I say, said the Mock Turtle, offended. The Griffin added, let's hear about your adventures. I can tell you my adventures from this morning, Alice said shyly. But there's no sense in going back to yesterday, because I was a different person then. Explain all that, said the Mock Turtle. No, no. Tell your adventures first, said the Griffin impatiently. Explanations take too long. So Alice began telling her adventures from the time she saw the White Rabbit. She felt nervous at first because the two creatures were so close to her, and they opened their eyes and mouths wide, but she got braver as she spoke. Her listeners were quiet until she got to the part about repeating, "You are old, Father William," to the caterpillar, and how the words came out differently. The Mock Turtle took a deep breath and said, "That's very curious." "It's all pretty curious," said the Griffin. "It all came out differently," the Mock Turtle repeated thoughtfully. "I would like to hear her repeat something now. Tell her to begin." He looked at the Griffin like it had some power over Alice. "Stand up and repeat, 'Tis the voice of the sluggard," said the Griffin. How these creatures order me around, thought Alice. I might as well be at school. But she stood up and began, but her head was so full of the lobster quadrille that she hardly knew what she was saying. The words came out very funny. "'Tis the voice of the lobster," I heard him declare. "You have baked me too brown, I must sugar my hair." As a duck with its eyelids, so he with his nose. Trims his belt and buttons, and turns out his toes. When the sands are all dry, he is gay as a lark, and will talk in contemptuous tones of the shark. But when the tide rises and sharks are around, his voice has a timid and tremulous sound. That's different from what I used to say when I was a child, said the Gryphon. Well, I never heard it before, said the Mock Turtle. But it sounds like nonsense. Alice said nothing. She sat down with her face in her hands, wondering if anything would ever happen normally again. I would like it explained, said the Mock Turtle. She can't explain it, said the Gryphon quickly. Go on to the next verse. But about his toes, the Mock Turtle asked. How could he turn them with his nose? It's a dance position, Alice said, but she felt puzzled and wanted to change the subject. Go on to the next verse, the Gryphon said again. It starts with I passed by his garden. Alice didn't dare to disobey, even though she was sure it would go wrong. She went on in a shaky voice. I passed by his garden and saw with one eye how the owl and the panther were sharing a pie. The panther took pie crust, gravy, and meat, while the owl had the dish as its share of the treat. When the pie was all finished, the owl, as a favor, was kindly allowed to keep the spoon, while the panther got knife and fork with a growl, and ended the banquet by, What is the use of repeating all this stuff, the Mock Turtle said, if you don't explain it as you go? It's the most confusing thing I ever heard. Yes, I think you better stop, said the Gryphon. Alice was happy to stop talking. Shall we try another part of the lobster quadrille? The Gryphon asked. Or would you like the Mock Turtle to sing you another song? Oh, a song please, if the Mock Turtle would be so kind, Alice said eagerly. The Gryphon said in an offended tone, HMPH. No accounting for tastes. Sing her turtle soup, old fellow. The Mock Turtle sighed and began to sing in a choked voice. Beautiful soup, so rich and green, waiting in a hot bowl. Who for such dainties would not bend? Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Who cares for fish, game, or any other dish? Who would not give all else for two? Penneth only of beautiful soup. Penneth only of beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Beautiful soup. Soup of the evening, beautiful, beautiful soup. Chorus again, cried the Gryphon. The Mock Turtle began to repeat it, when they heard, the trial is starting, in the distance. Come on, shouted the Gryphon, taking Alice's hand. It hurried off without waiting for the song's end. What trial? Alice asked as she ran, but the Gryphon only shouted, Come on, and ran faster. The sad words of the song faded behind them. Soup of the evening. Beautiful, beautiful soup. Chapter 11. Who Stole the Tarts? The King and Queen of Hearts sat on their thrones when Alice arrived. There was a big crowd all around them, with little birds, animals, and a pack of cards. The knave stood before them in chains, with a soldier beside him. The White Rabbit was near the king, holding a trumpet in one hand and a scroll in the other. In the middle of the court was a table with a big dish of tarts. They looked so good that Alice felt hungry. I wish they would finish the trial and serve the food, she thought. But there was no chance for that, so she looked around to pass the time. Alice had never been in a court before, but she had read about them. She felt happy to see that she knew the names of many things there. That's the judge, she said to herself, because of his big wig. Actually, the judge was the king. He wore his crown on top of the wig, so he didn't look very comfortable. And that's the jury box, thought Alice. And those 12 creatures. She had to call them creatures, because some were animals and some were birds. I guess they are the jurors. She said the word, jurors, a few times to herself, because she was proud to know it. But jurymen would have works too. The 12 jurors wrote busily on slates. What are they doing? Alice whispered to the Griffin. They can't write anything yet. The trial hasn't even started. They are writing down their names, whispered the Griffin. They don't want to forget them before the trial ends. Stupid things. Alice started to say loudly, but she stopped quickly when the White Rabbit shouted, "Silence in the court." The king put on his glasses and looked around to see who was talking. Alice saw that all the jurors wrote stupid things on their slates. She even noticed that one of them didn't know how to spell stupid and had to ask his neighbor. What a mess their slates will be before the trial is over, thought Alice. One juror had a pencil that squeaked. Alice couldn't stand that, so she went behind him and quickly took it away. The poor little juror, it was Bill, the lizard, didn't understand what happened. He looked for it everywhere, and in the end, he had to write with one finger for the rest of the day, which didn't leave a mark on the slate. "Herald, read the accusation," said the king. Then the White Rabbit blew the trumpet and read. The Queen of Hearts made some tarts. All on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts stole those tarts. And took them away. Consider your verdict, the king told the jury. Not yet, the rabbit said quickly. There's more to come. Call the first witness, said the king. The rabbit blew the trumpet and shouted, "First witness." The first witness was the Hatter. He came in with a teacup in one hand and a piece of bread in another. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," he started. "I was having my tea when I was called." "You should have finished," said the king. "When did you start?" The Hatter looked at the March Hare, who had come in with him. "March 14th, I think," he said. "15th, said the March Hare. 16th, said the Dormouse. "Write that down," the king said to the jury. The jury quickly wrote down all 3 dates on their slates, added them up, and wrote the answer in shillings and pence. "Take off your hat," said the king to the Hatter. "It isn't mine," said the Hatter. "Stolen," exclaimed the king, and the jury quickly noted that down. "I keep hats to sell," the Hatter explained. "I don't have any of my own. I am a hatter." The Queen put on her glasses and stared at the Hatter. He turned pale and fidgeted. "Give your evidence," said the king. "Don't be nervous, or I'll have you executed." This did not make the Hatter feel better. He kept moving, looking at the Queen, and in his panic, he bit a big piece out of his teacup instead of the bread. Just then, Alice felt a strange feeling and realized she was growing larger again. At first, she thought about leaving the court, but then she decided to stay as long as there was room. "I wish you wouldn't squeeze so," said the Dormouse sitting next to her. "I can hardly breathe." "I can't help it," Alice said quietly. "I'm growing." "You have no right to grow here," said the Dormouse. "Don't be silly," said Alice boldly. "You know you're growing too." "Yes, but I grow at a normal pace," said the Dormouse. "Not in that silly way." He got up and moved to the other side of the court. The Queen kept staring at the Hatter. Just as the Dormouse moved, she told one officer, "Bring me the list of singers from the last concert." The Hatter shook so much that he lost both his shoes. "Give your evidence," the king said angrily. "Or I'll have you executed, whether you're nervous or not." "I'm a poor man, Your Majesty," began the Hatter nervously. "I just started my tea, not more than a week ago. My bread and butter is very thin, and the tea twinkles." "The twinkling of what?" asked the king. "It began with the tea," the Hatter answered. "Of course twinkling begins with tea," said the king sharply. Do you think I'm a fool? Go on. I'm a poor man, said the hatter. Most things twinkle after that, only the March Hare said. I didn't, shouted the March Hare quickly. You did, said the hatter. I deny it, said the March Hare. He denies it, said the king. Leave out that part. Well, anyway, the Dormouse said, the hatter went on, looking around, feeling anxious, but the Dormouse didn't say anything because it was asleep. After that, the hatter continued, I cut some more bread and butter. But what did the Dormouse say? One juror asked. I can't remember, said the hatter. You must remember, said the king. Or I'll have you executed. The poor hatter dropped his teacup and bread and butter, and went down on one knee. I'm a poor man, your majesty, he said. You're a very poor speaker, said the king. One of the guinea pigs cheered, and the officers of the court quickly silenced him. They put him in a big canvas bag that is tied at the top and sat on it. I'm glad I saw that, thought Alice. I read in the newspapers at trials there was some attempt at applause, which was immediately silenced by the officers, but I never understood it until now. If that's all you know, you may stand down, said the king. I can't go any lower, said the hatter. I'm on the floor. Then you may sit down, the king replied. The other guinea pig cheered again and was silenced. Now that's enough of the guinea pigs, thought Alice. Now we can move on. I'd rather finish my tea, said the hatter, looking nervously at the queen, who was reading the list of singers. You may go, said the king, and the hatter quickly left, not even stopping to put on his shoes. Just take his head off outside, the queen added to one of the officers, but the hatter was gone before the officer could reach the door. Call the next witness, said the king. The next witness was the Duchess's cook. She carried a pepper box, and Alice guessed who it was when she heard all the people near the door sneezing at once. Give your evidence, the king said. Shan't, said the cook. The king looked worried at the White Rabbit, who said softly, Your Majesty must question this witness. Well, if I must, said the king sadly. He folded his arms and frowned at the cook until his eyes nearly disappeared. What are tarts made of? He asked. Pepper, mostly, said the cook. Treacle, came a sleepy voice behind her. Capture that dormouse, shrieked the queen. Behead it. Get it out of the court. Suppress it. Pinch it. Off with its whiskers. For a few minutes, the court was in chaos as they tried to get the dormouse out. By the time they settled down again, the cook had disappeared. Never mind, said the king with relief. Call the next witness. He whispered to the queen, You really must question the next witness. It makes my forehead ache. Alice watched the White Rabbit fumbling with the list, very curious to see who the next witness was, because they hadn't gotten much evidence yet. Imagine her surprise when the rabbit read out in a loud voice, Alice. Chapter 12. Alice's Evidence. Here, cried Alice, forgetting how big she had grown recently. She jumped up quickly and accidentally knocked over the jury box with her skirt. The jurymen fell onto the crowd below. They looked like a globe of goldfish that Alice had spilled once. Oh, I'm very sorry, she said in surprise. She hurried to pick them up, because she remembered about the goldfish and thought they needed to be collected quickly, or they would die. The trial cannot go on, said the king seriously, until all the jurymen are in their places, _all_, he repeated, looking hard at Alice. Alice looked at the jury box and saw she had put the lizard in upside down. It waved its tail sadly because it couldn't move. She quickly got it out and put it right. Not that it matters much, she thought. It would work just as well upside down. When the jury got over the shock of falling down, they slowly wrote about the accident, except for the lizard, who just sat quietly with its mouth open, staring at the roof. "What do you know about this?" asked the king. "Nothing," Alice said. "Nothing at all?" asked the king. "Nothing at all," said Alice. "That's very important," said the king, and the jury began to write it down. Just then, the White Rabbit interrupted. "UN_important, Your Majesty means, of course," he said respectfully while glaring at him. "UN_important, yes," said the king quickly. He mumbled to himself, important, unimportant, unimportant, important, as if he liked to see how the words sounded. Some jurymen wrote important, and some wrote unimportant. Alice saw this from where she sat today, but it doesn't matter, she thought. At that moment, the king, who had been writing in his notebook, shouted, "Silence." He read from his book, Rule 42. All people over 1 mile high must leave the court. Everyone looked at Alice. "I'm not a mile high," said Alice. "You are," said the king. "Nearly 2 miles high," said the queen. "Well, I'm not leaving," said Alice. "Besides, that's not a real rule. You just made it up." "It's the oldest rule in the book," said the king. "Then it should be number 1, said Alice. The king turned pale and quickly closed his notebook. "Consider your verdict," he said nervously to the jury. "There's more evidence to come, Your Majesty," said the White Rabbit, jumping up. "This paper was just picked up." "What's in it?" asked the Queen. "I haven't opened it yet," said the rabbit, "but it seems to be a letter written by the prisoner to someone." "It must have been," said the king, "unless it was written to nobody, which isn't usual." "Who is it for?" asked one juror. "It isn't directed to anyone," said the White Rabbit. "There's nothing written on the outside." He opened the paper and said, "It isn't a letter. It's a set of verses." "Are they in the prisoner's handwriting?" asked another juror. "No, they aren't," said the White Rabbit. "That's the strange part." The jury looked confused. "He must have copied someone else's writing," said the king. The jury smiled again. "Please, Your Majesty," said the knave. "I didn't write it, and they can't prove that I did. There's no name at the end." "If you didn't sign it," said the king, "that makes it worse. You must have meant to do something bad, or you would have signed your name like an honest man." Everyone clapped their hands at this. It was the most clever thing the king had said. "That proves his guilt," said the queen. "Off with his." "It doesn't prove anything," said Alice. "You don't even know what is happening." "Read it," said the king. The White Rabbit put on his glasses. "Where should I start, Your Majesty?" he asked. "Start at the beginning," said the king seriously. "Go on until you reach the end, then stop." There was silence in the court as the White Rabbit read these verses. "They told me you had been to her, and mentioned me to him. She gave me a good character, but said I could not swim. He sent them word I had not gone. We know it to be true. If she should push the matter on, what would become of you? I gave her 1, they gave him 2. You gave us 3 or more. They all returned from him to you, though they were mine before. If I or she should chance to be involved in this affair, he trusts to you to set them free, exactly as we were. My notion was that you had been, before she had this fit, an obstacle that came between him and ourselves and it. Don't let him know she liked them best, for this must ever be a secret kept from all the rest, between yourself and me. That's the most important piece of evidence we've heard," said the king, rubbing his hands. "So now let the jury If any of them can explain it, Alice said. She had grown so big that she was not afraid to interrupt him. I'll give him 6pence. I don't believe it means anything. The jurors wrote down, she doesn't believe it means anything, but none of them tried to explain the paper. If it doesn't mean anything, said the king, then that saves us a lot of trouble. We don't need to find meaning. But I don't know. He spread the verses on his knees and looked at them with one eye. I think I see some meaning. Said I could not swim, you can't swim, can you? He asked the knave. The knave sadly shook his head. Do I look like I can? He did not look like he could, because he was made of cardboard. So far, so good, said the king, continuing to mumble the verses. We know it to be true, that's the jury, of course. If she should push the matter on, that must be the queen. What would become of you? What would? I gave her 1, they gave him 2, that's what he did with the tarts. But it goes on with they all returned from him to you, Alice said. Why, there they are, said the king happily, pointing to the tarts on the table. That's clear. Then again, before she had this fit you never had fits, my dear, I think, he asked the queen. Never, said the queen angrily, throwing an inkstand at the lizard as she spoke. The poor Bill had begun writing with one finger, but now started writing again using the ink running down his face. Then the words don't fit you, said the king, smiling at the court. There was silence. It's a pun, the king said angrily, and everyone laughed. Let the jury think about their decision, said the king for the 20th time that day. No, no, said the queen. Sentence first, verdict after. Stuff and nonsense, said Alice loudly. The idea of having the sentence first. Be quiet, shouted the queen, turning purple. I won't, said Alice. Off with her head, the queen yelled at the top of her voice. Nobody moved. Who cares for you, said Alice, now her full size. You are just a pack of cards. When she said this, the whole pack flew up and came down on her. She screamed, half in fright and half in anger, and tried to fight them off. Suddenly, she found herself lying on the bank with her head in her sister's lap. Her sister was gently brushing dead leaves off Alice's face. Wake up, Alice, dear, her sister said. What a long sleep you had. Oh, I had such a strange dream, said Alice. She told her sister all about her adventures, as best as she could remember, and when she finished, her sister kissed her and said, It was a curious dream, dear. Now run inside for your tea, it's getting late. So Alice got up and ran off, thinking while she ran about how wonderful the dream had been. But her sister sat quietly as Alice had left her, leaning her head back, watching the sun set, thinking about little Alice and all her wonderful adventures, until she too began to dream, and this was her dream. First, she dreamed of little Alice, with tiny hands on her knee and bright eyes looking up at her. She could hear her voice and see how Alice kept her hair out of her eyes. As she listened, everything around her became alive with the strange creatures from Alice's adventures. The long grass rustled at her feet as the white rabbit hurried by. The frightened mouse splashed through the nearby pool. She heard the rattling teacups as the March Hare and his friends had their never-ending meal, and the Queen's voice shouting at her guests to be executed. Once more, the pig baby was sneezing on the Duchess's lap while plates and dishes crashed around it. Once more, the griffin shrieked, the lizard's pencil squeaked, and the miserable mock turtle sobbed. She sat quietly with her eyes closed, half believing she was in Wonderland, but knowing if she opened her eyes again, everything would change to boring reality. The grass would only rustle in the wind, and the pool would ripple with the waving reeds. The rattling teacups would become the sounds of sheep bells, and the Queen's sharp calls would change to a shepherd boy's voice. The sneeze of the baby, the griffin's shout, and all the other strange noises would transform to the busy sounds of a farmyard. Lastly, She imagined how Alice would grow up and keep the loving heart of her childhood. She would gather other children around her and tell them strange tales, perhaps even the dream of Wonderland from long ago. She would share their simple sorrows and find joy in their simple pleasures, remembering her own childhood and happy summer days. The end.